Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Linda Baker, and with me is Annalise Stratman. Are pleased on behalf of our team to welcome everyone to the webinar today. Wherever you are on Turtle Island today, please join us in acknowledging and thanking the generations of Indigenous peoples who have cared for these lands and in celebrating the continued strength and spirit of Indigenous peoples. As settlers, we commit to making the promise of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular, to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country. Today's Learning Network and Knowledge Hub webinar brings you Dr. Akosua McFadgion, an expert on the topic of intimate partner violence, trauma, and traumatic brain injury, and an engaging and dynamic presenter that we've had the pleasure of hearing in person just recently. Before I introduce Dr. McFadgion, I'll review the webinar format quickly. The presentation slides are posted on our website, and the link is in the chat box, and that's our most frequent questions. So we just want to make sure everybody's clear that Dr. McFadgion has permitted us to share her slides with you. Dr. McFadgion will present for up to an hour, and during her presentation, please type any comments or questions that you may have into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. From 2 to 2:15, I will present as many of your questions as I can for Dr. McFadgion's response. At the end of the webinar, you will see a link in the chat box to an evaluation. Your responses are anonymous and will help us plan future webinars. After completing the evaluation, follow the prompts and a certificate of attendance will be emailed to you. The webinar recording will be posted on our website within the next few days. And now it is our pleasure to introduce Dr. McFadgion. She is the director of the Office of Interpersonal Violence Prevention at Howard University. She is a trained social worker and research psychologist with over 20 years of experience. Her research interest is examining the relationship between intimate partner violence and traumatic brain injury, and how these facets of trauma affect women's mental health. Her research and practice experience has blessed her with the insight to frame healthy relationships from an evidence-based and trauma-informed approach. Welcome, Dr. McFadgion, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Can you guys hear me pretty good? Yay, okay, thank you so much. I will apologize in advance. You might hear a random dog barking in the background, but hopefully he will keep quiet. All right, so let's get going. So today I'm going to talk to you about traumatic brain injuries and the associated symptoms related to it, because there is a co-occurrence or comorbidity of traumatic brain injury symptoms or post-concussive symptoms specifically that are very much related to experiences of post-traumatic stress and also depression. So I'm going to actually read this definition because I want to highlight a few points. So the Brain Injury Association of America says that traumatic brain injuries are an insult to the brain not of a degenerative or congenital nature. So the TBIs that we're going to talk about today are not brain injuries that happen in utero or because of a natural issue, but caused by an external force that may produce a diminished or altered state of consciousness. So diminished means a few minutes, few seconds of consciousness, but then also the hit can be so severe that it can be an altered state of consciousness, which results in an impairment of cognitive abilities or physical functioning. We're going to get into that today. It can also result in the disturbance of behavior or emotional functioning. These impairments can be temporary or permanent. And I think that is the primary challenge that many survivors face, because sometimes the issues can surface and then disappear and then come back. Can cause partial or total functioning disability or psychosocial maladjustment. Now, the deciding factor to determine whether or not a TBI is mild, moderate, or severe is the level of consciousness and how long the person experiences unconsciousness. So for us today, we are interested in mild TBI. Most of the research indicates that many of the survivors of intimate partner violence or domestic violence experience mild traumatic brain injuries. And these are injuries where there is a loss of consciousness or post-traumatic amnesia for less than 24 hours. Even with the strangulation, the challenge with the strangulation is that when someone is preventing air to reach the brain will, what I call, provide a self-defense mechanism and shut itself down. So shut the body down so that it can continue to function, hopefully when the person regains consciousness. And so once the oxygen is not able to get to the brain, then we have an anoxic injury. So we have also facial injuries or severely shaken that can manifest as traumatic brain injuries as well. And what happens is the brain, the membrane will go in an opposite or accelerated position in one way, and then the force allows or takes the brain into another direction. All right, so I believe you guys are asking me questions. Okay, all right. Intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence, as we all know, is the physical and sexual violence, emotional abuse, controlling behaviors by a current or ex-partner against a female partner. That's what we're going to talk about today. We are looking only at female victims, but please make it clear that men can also be victims of intimate partner violence and can suffer these same challenges as well. There is also physical abuse in particular that can cause or be connected to head injuries or experiences of strangulation. And because there is a head injury and choking incident or injury, we now have these traumatic brain injury symptoms that impair the cognitive and physical performance of an individual. Now here, look at the symptoms here. I pulled the PTSD symptoms directly from the DSM-5, and you will see that there is both post-concussive symptoms and PTSD symptoms have trouble concentrating. There is trouble sleeping on both sides, memory loss, headaches, dizziness, persistent inability to experience positive emotions, or persistent distorted cognitions in terms of blaming herself. On the post-concussive side, we also have some extra things: post-traumatic amnesia, headaches, dizziness, and seeing spots. So you, as a professional, healthcare professional, social worker working in a hospital, when a young woman comes to you, the symptoms that you are seeing are both types of symptoms if the woman has experienced a traumatic brain injury. So the challenge is, when you are working with her, it might seem that she's manifesting PTSD symptoms, but it might be post-concussive symptoms because they manifest very, very similar ways. Here are some extra symptoms related to traumatic brain injuries that I want to highlight, just maybe one or two. But these are symptoms that we might not necessarily see, particularly in a hospital setting. If someone is coming in for neck or back pain and they haven't communicated to you that they have experienced physical abuse because of domestic or intimate partner violence, you might not necessarily know that neck or back pain is because of the abuse. Gynecological, I share this story about this young woman every time I get this chance, because she was going to a clinic in her community and had been numerous times because of the irregular bleeding or irregular menstrual cycle that she was having. And so I happened to be in the clinic working with a study with Johns Hopkins University, and we were collecting data around TBI. And so after I completed my questionnaire with her, as we were leaving, she was starting to share why she was in the clinic. And now, mind you, in the time that we were together, she communicated to me that she experienced an incident with her partner where he slammed her into a wall and she was unconscious for at least 20 to maybe 25 minutes. But in her words, she was unconscious to the point where the abuser was able to get her son dressed and off to school and back. And so the little boy's school was close by, but still it was 20, 25 minutes. And since that time, we were able to figure out that's when she started having the irregular menstrual cycle. And so I communicated to her that she was going back and forth to the clinic. And I said to her, you might want to tell the doctors about this abusive relationship. You might want to let them know that, that you've had, it sounds like, a head injury. And so she was able to get the support that she needed. But my point in sharing that story is many times the women that we are supporting are experiencing a multitude of traumatic events. And so traumatic brain injury is not going to be, unfortunately, at the top of the list. And we might think it's something else. So here is the story. Here is what we have. We have a woman who is having difficulty making decisions, and I'm just throwing it out there that is very often an injury in the frontal lobe. She might have difficulty remembering or concentrating on tasks, so there might be injury to the temporal parietal lobe. And then she might also have difficulty reading or writing the information that you're giving her about a job, about a referral to another doctor. So there is injury to occipital lobe there. But the injuries can also be diffuse, and that happens in particularly with strangulation. Strangulation does not cause or present an injury in one locality in the brain, but what it does is impact the entire brain. And so you're not really sure of the symptoms that manifest because of the strangulation. You're not really sure, well, is it difficulty concentrating because she was hit at the front of her face? Maybe she was thrown into a wall, with her face forward. So you can't really tell. And because you can't tell, my suggestion is to always, here's my you can't tell slide. But my suggestion is to always screen for traumatic brain injury, particularly when women report to you or share with you that they are in an abusive relationship. You're going to already give them a screening for PTSD and depression, what have you, but I'm also encouraging you to screen for traumatic brain injury. Okay, I'm checking the chat. Looks like we're good. Okay. Screenings. Key questions. If you remember nothing else that you hear today, at least ask, have you ever been strangled or hit in the head and lost consciousness? For many of the women that I've done research with, they're not going to equate loss of consciousness with abuse. So you might want to change the words a little bit. Have you ever been choked or hit across the head or blacked out? So those are the kind of common terms that women report experiencing. The next question is, have you ever been strangled or hit in the head afterwards and had a time where you couldn't remember anything? So there might have been an abusive incident and there was this fight. Maybe she was fighting back and then she blacks out. And then the next thing she says is, I can't remember what happened after that, but I just got up and did what I had to do. So that might be an indication of a traumatic brain injury. And then finally, you want to ask her, have you ever been strangled and lost consciousness and couldn't remember anything after? So the first one is for a significant time period, and then immediately after, there is a difference. As we mentioned earlier, the difference between mild, moderate, and severe TBI. Okay, here are 2 screenings that you can take home with you. They are readily available online. The BISC, there is a little bit of an effort to get approval to receive the questionnaire, but it is comprehensive. It is my favorite, but you know, that's a free plug for them. So, HELP questionnaire. 5 different questions. Have you ever been hit on the head? Were you ever seen in the emergency room because of an injury to your head? Did you ever lose consciousness or experience a period of being dazed and confused? Did you have any problems in your daily life related to irritability, silliness, apathy, fatigue, impulsiveness, self-awareness, decreased ability to learn new information? So you're going to ask all of these questions. And then any significant sickness. And then once you ask the young woman all of these questions, there is a score. Now, the brain injury screening questionnaire is extremely comprehensive. It allows you the ability to determine if there is a traumatic brain injury. You can determine if it was related to an abusive relationship or abusive incident or a car accident or you fell off your bike. So the first set of questions here talk about loss of consciousness. And as you can see, what it's trying to do is to get at what level of severity. Is it a mild, moderate, or severe traumatic brain injury? So 20 minutes to an hour, less than 20 minutes. I've not had an experience with a woman who had it for more than an hour. Dazed and confused afterwards, definitely 11 to 20 minutes, seeing that 20 minutes to an hour, maybe so. And then the last question, have you experienced a blow to the head or a medical emergency in which you definitely lost consciousness or were dazed or confused? So here is the set of questions in the BISC that talks about the symptoms and how the symptoms are experienced in terms of daily living. So how often are you having headaches? How often do you find yourself thinking slowly? Friends and relatives seem unfamiliar. Do you have difficulty concentrating, having a poor span of attention? Now we're going to look at some screening options for post-traumatic stress. So the first, very small screening, only 5 questions, very similar to the HELP screening for the TBI. Have you had nightmares about the events or thought about the events when you didn't want to? Felt numb or detached from people, activities, or surroundings? Feel guilty or unable to stop blaming yourself for the event? And this is going to give you a score very similar to the HELP. Now, the post-traumatic stress disorder symptom scale is an interview, and I would add that the questions are very lengthy. There are at least 150 or so questions, and that includes at least 100 questions about symptoms only, and then it asks about the injuries. So in those 2 instances, you definitely want to be in a space where you can have a conversation with the woman. But here are some of the interview questions. I picked out the questions related to the symptomatology. So have you had persistent difficulty concentrating? Have you been jumpier, more easily startled since the trauma? Have you had persistent difficulty falling or staying asleep? So I hope that you're already recognizing that even with the screenings that we have in place, the symptoms are manifesting the same. The questions are very similar. The experience is very similar. So my argument is that it does not take an extra step to ask a woman about a TBI, because you're already going to ask about post-traumatic stress, I'm sure, and depression. So just a few more questions about the trauma related to the physical abuse. So why are screenings important? Because I probably just said something that makes you feel like, well, screenings are not important because they're measuring the same thing. Not so. Once you do the screening, what that does, at least signifies to you that the survivor needs to be connected to services. And if you ask a few more questions about TBI, the injuries themselves, then it will also cue you in to be able to connect them to if it's severe enough, to get an MRI or a CAT scan, but then also help, we're going to talk about this later, but also help them figure out how they can go about their daily lives managing those symptoms. Okay, so we're back to this. So we've got this intimate partner violence, physical abuse. We've got this relationship between physical abuse, head injury, and the symptoms. But the injuries can be unnoticed. We've got anoxic injuries that are not going to clue you in specifically to where the injury might be. We have blunt force trauma, where the person is hit across the head with an object or slammed into a wall. We have the co-occurrence of all of these different types of symptoms. And there are some studies where the symptomatology of TBI can last for longer than 5 years or so. So it's very difficult to determine when exactly in their lifespan they receive the injury. They may be 60, 55 years old now and experience an abusive relationship when they were in their early 30s or late 20s and still having some challenges and not sure why. It might still be, as I said, to ask questions about a TBI, even though they might be in a relationship now where they're very happy. They may not have communicated to family or anyone else that there was this abusive relationship. And I'm sure all of us can share why that might be. Now, the women that are living in abusive domestic violence shelters, they tend to be women, when they've experienced a TBI, tend to be women who have experienced the most severe level of trauma. Because my thought is at that time, the abuse has gotten so much so to the point where they have decided to leave the relationship. All of us know that it's very difficult for victims or survivors to leave an abusive relationship. But when they get to the point where they're ready to go, there has more likely than not been some severe cases of abuse. And so you might want to ask just across the board in domestic violence shelters about TBI. Now, here is the part about my research that I think is unique to what is out there. So we have this context of co-occurrence of PTSD, TBI, and post-traumatic stress, depression, all of these different symptoms coexisting with one another. And then we already have a context of abuse where the woman is trying to figure out who she is, how does she maintain who she is, how does she take care of her children if there are children, how is she going to figure out how to meet the demands that you have upon her in terms of finding a job, finding a place to live, being able to manage anger if there's irritability. So my suggestion is that we recognize that Black women in particular have what I am calling, what I call her cultural self. And so I want you to, I guess, pay attention to me because I did not provide this detail on the slide because I wanted to just kind of give it to you myself. So cultural self, there is a inclusion of her knowledge or awareness of herself, and then who she believes she is in relation to her community. So her cultural self, it includes her spirit, her unique experiences as a Black woman, her communal experiences. Black women, and I'm not saying that any other racial group does not have this experience, but I am talking specifically today about Black women, have a communal experience with one another where that sisterhood creates a multi-dimension of who she is. So her self-knowledge is the intersection of the political, religious, social locations that she experiences daily. So I don't just walk out of my house and decide, you know, today I am only going to be a Black woman today. I'm not going to take my political views, my religious views, and I'm not going to take anything from my community. We don't get to decide that. Self-reliance. She is an individual who believes in her inner power and an optimal conceptualization of who she is. She gets to decide who she is. She can decide where she wants to go, and she can decide who she wants to become. The collective experience. The collective experience gives Black women that tribe, if you will, that is always present with her. It's a sense of belonging, her family relationships, community support, and connection. Spirituality is used as a method to work through issues. So if she's challenged with an abusive partner, very often I would hear women say, you know, I'm just gonna pray about it and pray that when he comes home, today is gonna be a good day. We're not gonna have these issues. A sense of the identity. Her sense of identity related to the cultural self, the self-knowledge and self-reliance, is now influenced by trauma. Because when Black women experience trauma, you as a healthcare professional, you're seeing it in front of you as the individual, but I am telling you that experience of trauma is a collective issue. So if I am in an abusive relationship, then my sisters, my family, my parents are also going to be in that abusive relationship. On top of what I'm experiencing as an abused woman, I am also now taking on the responsibility, unwillingly, to manifest the experience of trauma within my community. And so what that means is, if my partner is a Black man, I now say, I am being abused by my partner, but I don't want to involve any other system, because I know what this system is going to do to my man, to my husband, to my male partner, to my Black male partner. So both the individual and the collective experiences of trauma influence who she is in terms of her cultural self, but it also influences how she responds to the collective experience and how the collective experience responds to her. Now, there is a good side to this. It's not all bad. We also have an individual and a collective experience of success. I love telling a story. I live in DC, and when President Barack Obama, when he became president, my mother would call me all the time and say, "Did you see Barack today?" And I'd say, "Mom, no, I don't see him every day." And so she would think that his success, his ability to become president, was something that belonged to us as well. Or when we have someone who has been struggling with drugs or substance abuse or alcoholism, and they finally get clean, the entire family and community is like, yes, they made it, they've overcome, let's celebrate. There is a sense of connectedness, there is a sense of accomplishment for everyone. The collective experience also includes a sense of control, where we get to decide what service provision we have. And I like to say it this way. Very often, early research was trying to suggest that minorities or poor communities did not readily have accessible to them quality healthcare facilities. And so now, fast forward 2019, in poor communities, we have, to some degree, quality healthcare systems in place. We have clinics and hospitals and what have you, urgent care. We have those facilities in poor communities, but researchers are still finding that people are not engaging with the service. And what I often have to say is, it's not just about accessibility. I need to know how you're going to treat me when I get there. So even though it might be right across the street from me, if I feel like when I get there, if I'm being disrespected or if I'm not feeling welcomed, if somebody else, if one of my sisters tell me I went in there and I took my kids there and it was a hot mess and people didn't respond to it, then I'm not going to go. And it's right next door. Power differential, facilitators and customers. So, not yet. Sense of control. So if I am the victim or survivor that you're working with, and say you are my social worker, and you're giving me all of these wonderful suggestions on how I should engage with you, and you might be irritated because I'm always late, or I have an attitude when I get there. It is very important, if you want to initiate or maintain some degree of success with your clients, to always believe that the community always has the power. And so what I mean by that is, if I am giving you some challenges, it might be good to ask me, well, who do you feel supported by, or who do you go to when you're having challenges? And if I say, well, my Aunt Sally is everything to me. You know, if she said to me to jump off the moon, then I would go to the moon and jump off the moon. So you might need to bring Aunt Sally to one of your sessions. I want you to understand that we, as Black women, we operate and exist in collectiveness. And so very often, many of our decisions that we are making in abusive circumstances are heavily connected to the people that are around us. So I wanted to give you some examples of what that might look like. So first, here is a woman. As she's talking, you'll be able to hear the co-occurrence of the PTSD and post-concussive symptoms. And so she says, it seems like since I lost consciousness, just seems like everything seems to be more increased. Everything seems like fear is more constantly looking over my shoulder. So this woman was already under the care of a doctor because of PTSD. And what she's saying is, yes, I have post-traumatic stress, but since I had an incident where I lost consciousness, now it seems to be exacerbated. So everything that I do now, I'm always thinking he's going to be somewhere around, or in a lot of places I don't go because I would think that he probably is going to show up. That sounds like classic PTSD. But I am telling you that this woman experienced a traumatic brain injury as a result of her partner. They got into a fight, into a stairwell, and in an apartment building where they have the concrete steps. He dragged her down by her feet, so her head hit 16 steps on the way down. Here is what I mean by the individual experience. So we talked about the cultural steps. So he banged my head on the side of the tub. So then I asked, what did you do after you gained consciousness? She says, I got up and went to church. So rather than see that conversation as, you know, what are you thinking? You need to go to the hospital. She is telling you that I am feeling low right now and I need to go to the source of my strength. So I am going to church, and she probably stayed there all day until she got what she needed. So you can actually use that to support what you're doing with her. So the collective experience. He choked me while I was in my sleep, and I woke up gasping for air. I was gasping for air. I couldn't breathe. My neck got really, really tight, and my eyes felt like they were about to pop out of my head. I jumped up and I ran out in the living room, and he came out there to the living room, and that's when he jacked me up by my shirt and slammed me into the wall. I made a big imprint into the wall. So then I asked her what happened next. She says, once I came to, I called his mother and she talked to him. After that, everything was fine. So we have many, many women, particularly Black women, who are staying in relationships because they are being supported to do so by family members who believe, you know, this might just be one time, or it might just be a situation where you didn't need to get him upset. And so we need to figure this out together and as a community. But the other thing is, if she had gone to his mother and the mother had said, you know what, this is the last time you put your hands on her. Baby, you need to leave him. This is not good. This is not healthy for you. You lost consciousness as a result of strangulation and also being slammed into a wall. Nope, he's not good for you. I know he's my son, but he needs to go. So just having the desire to want someone in the collective to hold the abusive partner accountable, because there is still that relationship. The individual experience. Here are questions related to I asked them later in the interviews how they felt like their daily functioning was impacted. And I have another paper or presentation that talks about resiliency and sometimes how resiliency can hinder social workers and healthcare practitioners from actually seeing what's really or knowing what's really going on. So I asked her, so the abuser punched her in the eye, while she was driving. And I said, her job was driving. And so I asked her, well, how did that impact your employment? She says, well, that was the way I made my money, and that's zero right now. So she couldn't drive because of the damage to her eye. How did it impact her health? So she says, I have, almost like a migraine. Like if I get too frustrated, I'll black out. My head will start hurting on the left side. And the doctor gave me medication for that. So she's still continuing to function. What about your ability to cope with stressful situations? I don't think it has anything related to the TBI or the brain injury. Those were her words. But it's because I seem to cry a lot. I'm so frustrated. So some of the women were able to recognize that they had experienced a head injury. They didn't call it a TBI. But yes, something definitely happened to my head. But even then, it's not necessarily post-concussive symptoms. It's not even PTSD. It's because I'm frustrated. And so helping them understand that, well, frustration, irritability, aggression are all symptoms of PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. Here is a situation with a woman where you can see both the individual and collective experience. So she says she's feeling stuck, can't address or fulfill her goals. And it's like, I'm stuck. Some days I don't want to move. Like I said, some days I have to push myself to even get up out the bed because of, in her words, depression. I did a lot of hiding, staying in the house, a lot of crying, sucking to depression. Really couldn't take care of the kids. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't want them to see it. And so many of us have encountered or engaged with survivors who don't want children or the parents to see the abuse that's taking place in their home, or the abuse and the trauma that they're facing. But there is this, what that communicates to me, or what I wanted to communicate to you, is that there is an allegiance to the community. If I am the girl who graduated from high school and I got out of my poor community, and I'm now able to meet someone and have a relationship and have children, I'm living on my own, I don't want to communicate to my family that everything that you see is not true. I don't want to communicate to them that things are not working. And so I will continue to keep this secret. And the collective experience, unfortunately, affirms her desire to keep it a secret, because everyone in the collective, everyone in the community knows if you go and tell CFSA, child welfare, they're going to take the kids and your husband's going to be in jail, and now you're going to be alone. And you don't want that. So you just got to either, stick it out or figure out something else. This is another individual experience. She says she had to write everything down. After the choking incident, it just seems like she couldn't remember. I can remember longer but short. Like sometimes I'd be like, I know I used to be able to. I know what I have to do, so it wouldn't be nothing for me to remember it. But now I literally have to write things down. This sister was, I met her in a domestic violence shelter, and her son was living her, and what they were able to figure out is that her short-term memory was impacted. And so if she had an appointment with a social worker or a job interview in particular, because she missed the job interview, because she knew it the night before, but she got up the next day and forgot that there was an interview and did not go to the interview. So, of course, the case manager, caseworker in the shelter was highly upset that she didn't go to the interview, and said to her, she's not willing to be successful. She's not willing to see the plan through. And of course, she was very honest and said, I just forgot. I really, really forgot. But then I know that I can't see your faces, but I know you're thinking, if that woman came into me and I went through all of that to get that interview for her, and she did not show up for that interview, I'm going to have some issues. And so I get that. But I am also strongly suggesting that you take into consideration it might be something serious going on, an underlying issue related to TBI, and she doesn't know it, and then you don't know it either. So here is the last one is an aspect of resiliency. I have to get things done, like having a job. That's something that I would know I have to do anyway. So I would know I have to check to make sure because I need the job or I need to go to school. I would know the check. So this sister was forgetting throughout the day, but the only thing she kept on her mind was, is there something I should be doing related to getting a job? Is there something I should be doing related to going to school? Now, if you communicated anything else to her, like you need to come to this required support group, or you need to make sure you meet me at 3 o'clock, she forgot that. But if you ask her to make sure she goes to her interview, this is a different woman from the one above, interview related to her job, or completing applications, or going to fill out an application for school, she's going to remember that. Now, the last few minutes, I want to get into what you can do to support particularly Black women, because they are taking on all of this, the cultural self and the collective experience, and it is probably causing you some challenges to be able to work with them successfully, effectively. So everyone can propose, regardless of race, rehabilitation that focuses on restoring attention abilities through repeated practice. So here is how you do that. Inform case managers or advocates of the need to have the task appointment goals repeated. So that would mean that the survivor knows that that is a challenge for her. One of the things I see very often associated with Black women, though, is that we are difficult, we have the attitude, we have all the drama. I don't see that characteristic being assigned to other women. So I'm now asking that you not consider the client as difficult. She might not be difficult. She might be experiencing symptoms related to a TBI. So provide context-centered cognitive rehabilitation. And so meet her where she is. She might be able to function cognitively in some regard, like following rules, but she might not be able to concentrate, or following tasks, but she might not be able to concentrate on them. So this woman said, I was really good about writing things down that I had to do. It was focusing on them that I couldn't remember. So if she just wrote on her, she carried around a journal. And so if she only wrote in the journal, job interview at 3 o'clock, she might not remember where it is. And so you, as her social worker or caseworker or advocate, you can help provide those details for her. Irritability and aggression. I've kind of harped on this a little bit today. There is definitely irritability and aggression with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, but I want you to focus on how she is perceiving and how she interprets her experiences. Give her the opportunity and the time to really, what you're doing is dissect her cultural self. How is what she's forgetting connected to who she is as a Black woman and who she is connected to her community? So we have no place to live. My life is really not, life is just turned upside down. And so I'm not really focused on my individual self. I got to figure out how I'm going to identify a safe place for me and my children to live. That's her perception of where the priority is. But you can support her by saying, I'm going to help you find somewhere to live, but I really feel like something else is going on. I know you're not going to like it, but I really think we need to take a visit to the hospital, to the emergency room, wherever we can get MRI or what have you. Somebody raised their hand. Yay. Okay. Where am I, Chance? Can you unmute yourself to ask your question? Okay.
So, Akaswa, people can't speak. So they're writing questions, and we'll present those to you at the end if that's okay.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna keep going. So the experience of memory challenges and problem solving. Self-regulation. So what I'm suggesting to you is allow her to create a strategy that works best for her. So if she says to you, you know what, I'm sorry, I know I've missed like five of our appointments. I just can't really remember. So then ask her, what in your life, what can you do, or what have you done to remember other things in your life? And it might be taking our child to school or remembering to bathe the baby. So there are particular steps that you can be able to take, and she's going to compartmentalize it into, all right, so these are everything that I have to do for my children. This is everything I have to do for work. This is everything I have to do for myself. And if you are asking her to do something for herself, a lot of times Black women and most women are going to put themselves last. So now you've got to figure out what's your list with your children and your list with work, and then help them figure out how to regulate the importance of either one. Incorporate a support system. Remember I said earlier, there is a collective experience. Every Black woman that you see from this day forward, I want you to just envision her with all of these people behind her, all of these people supporting and rooting for her and advocating for her. And you need to include them in what you're doing to support that individual. Factors to consider. So think about what the literature says about the co-occurrence, or the word you're going to see in the literature as comorbidity with post-concussive symptoms and PTSD. Much of the research is indicating that while they are similar, they still manifest differently. So as the woman indicated earlier, where she was already diagnosed with PTSD, but now the symptoms got worse. And so that might not be that she needs more medication for a PTSD or more therapy to address the PTSD. It might be taking a step back and asking her about the context of abuse to see if there's a TBI. Cultural implications. Again, I just want to just highlight that there is an individual experience and there is a collective experience, and the collective experience will can either support the services and the opportunities that you want to provide to her, but it can also hinder what you're trying to do. So my advice is to include the collective to be able to get that support. And those references, but you have the slides, and that is all I have in terms of presentation. So now I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Dr. McFadgion. And we have a number of questions that have come in, and we want to start with, from your experience, how does learning that one has a traumatic brain injury or post-concussive symptoms from a violent incident or a cumulative violent incident, how does that impact a woman's healing journey? Is there a range of reactions? Do some people not want to know that? Is that bad news? Is it reassuring for some people? What's your experience?
So my experience, thank you for that question, because when I started doing this research, I was very nervous, honestly, about, sitting in front of a woman and, she's gone through all this trauma with the abuse, and now I have to tell her she has a permanent injury. So I was nervous about that. But my experience has been that once they have a reason for why things are the way that they are, why their behavior is the way it is, because like for the headaches, I had women who were taking multiple forms of ibuprofen and aspirin, trying to resolve the headaches. They'd gone to many doctors and just could not figure out a way to manage the headaches. And so when I share with them, it might be a traumatic brain injury, you might want to get it checked out, and they say, oh, that explains a lot. That now I have something to point my finger at and say, you know what, I'm having these headaches because I have a brain injury. And so what that means is I might want to slow down. Might want to sit outside on a bench and just calm my nerves before I start addressing the tasks that are in my little booklet. So a number of them were relieved, honestly, to know that there was a name for what they were experiencing. And I remember one woman who was, she didn't even like the fact that she was always agitated and angry and irritable, but she didn't know why. And she just felt like, with the abuse, he did this to me. He made me angry. He made me irritable. But she was no longer in the relationship. And she, was very happy with the way her child was doing in class. And she loved her job, but she just still couldn't figure out, I'm in a good place, but why am I still so irritable? And so once we talked about that, then she was very happy to say, okay, it's not just me. I'm not crazy. There is something wrong with me. And I can tell you what it is. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Another question, Dr. McFadgion, are there any different assessment or intervention strategies you would suggest for a woman who is also struggling with substance use or misuse in addition to a traumatic brain injury and or post-traumatic stress disorder for Black women?
So what I would suggest, you've got to do the tertiary approach. So you take the different priorities first. And so I would definitely address the substance abuse because the chemicals are exacerbating the hormone levels that are off because of the traumatic brain injury. So if, you could say, oh, you have a TBI because of this abusive incident or multiple incidents, and get them to manage, you can teach them to manage the symptoms related to post-concussive symptoms, but they're not going to be able to manage them effectively because of the substance abuse. And so I would address the substance abuse first. I will just say, this is just my little experience with folks who have had substance abuse issues. I don't think the weekend respite or treatments, I don't think that they are as effective as they could be. I think a lot of time abusers are using that weekend program to detox. And then once they detox, they feel like on Monday, you know what, I'm good. I got this. I stopped drinking. I'm ready to go. And then they leave. and then they start their day. And then they hit a challenge on Thursday, and then it's an issue. So if you are able to work with them continuously, try to encourage them to do some sort of inpatient program so that they can really lower the levels of, of cortisol and other issues in their brain. So then they can start to address the TBI. But the weekend ones, they only make it worse.
Thank you. This next question, we've heard versions of this so many times, so we're really eager to hear your answer. If the abuse happened some time ago and a woman is now realizing that she may have a traumatic brain injury, how do you recommend that she talk with her doctor in a way that he or she is likely to take her serious? So we're probably talking about a family physician, not necessarily a neurologist or somebody particularly specializing in this area. So is the best way, would you think, to communicate with that care physician in order to be taken seriously and to get maybe the intervention or assessment that's needed?
So, all right, that's a loaded question. Let me think. So I would, Linda, repeat the first part of the question.
It's just that a woman is realizing that she
Okay, all right, I'm with you. Okay, so what I would do, yes. So what I would do, I hope that there are no medical doctors or family physicians in the room, because I'm going to say something that they don't like. So I would absolutely go on Google and go to those medical sites, and I would have them print out a list of post-concussive symptoms. And take the list of symptoms. They don't need to take a definition. They don't need to take any literature. Take the list of symptoms and say, here are 15 symptoms, and I'm experiencing at least 14. And you might not be able to tell me that I have it or not, but I am telling you that I would like you to screen me. I would like you to get me a referral for an MRI or a CAT scan or what have you, so that I can just see. And the doctor is probably going to say, if you had the injury a long time ago, yeah, it's already there. The damage is done. But for many women, they just want to know that what they know is for real. That they want to know it. And they want to get, a diagnosis, a document that says, I have a TBI and I'm not crazy and there is something wrong with me. And so give them that document, give them the symptoms so that they can at least see that the woman has done her research and they want to be addressed seriously. And how the symptoms, give them honest insight into how the symptoms are impacting their functioning. There was one question over here about the impact of women abuse on children and children who witness it. She could talk about that with that family physician. She could say, yes, the abuse was a long time ago, but my son is still experiencing nightmares, or still concerned that if I get into another relationship that I'm going to be harmed. And I want to be able to say to him that my irritability, my level of aggression, my suffering with headaches, it's not just me being a cop-out or me being a lazy mom. Something happened to me back then. And now for me to be able to engage with you as my kid or even as my physician, I need you to be patient with me. I don't need you to yell at me. I need to sit down and have a conversation with you.
Okay. Those are good suggestions, I think. Another question, Dr. McFadgion. For Indigenous women, sweating and sweats can be healing for trauma. However, the question is there a risk if someone has traumatic brain injury and they are fasting or doing sweats? So
yes.
That's really the question.
I love that. And so thank you for that question. So I'm not a medical doctor, so don't go and tell your doctor, Dr. McFadgion said, I have to do X, Y, Z. But what I know about, endorphins, like when you're running or when you are going through a detox, there is absolutely a relationship between the hormones that are released when you are going through like a sweat lodge, and it combats the cortisol levels that women experience. Because the cortisol levels, for people or communities who are constantly exposed or engaged with trauma, cortisol levels are always high. And what the sweat lodges or the fasting will do, honestly, is promote a healthier response to leveling out those imbalance in hormones. So actually, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to do the sweat lodge. It's a good thing to do the fast, as long as they got the care of their doctor in terms of fasting too long, that can impact their health. But giving women with a TBI the opportunity to sit, 30 minutes is a long time, but I think 30 minutes is a minimum, so that they can kind of get to a point where they're not having all of these multiple thoughts, to settle themselves and be able to engage with you successfully. So I think that's good. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think it actually helps. I am trying to start, I'm not going to run because, that's just not my thing. But, running helps, give you that energy, the endorphins are released. And so I find that women who run and have been in an abusive relationship are able to address the issues a little bit more effectively than when they don't. So we're going to try that out.
Okay, Akoswa, there's a question. You talked about a couple of screening tools. There's the BISC and then the HELP screening. And we have a question here wondering if there is specific training required to use those tools.
So there is, good question. So not with the HELPs. First, let me answer that. So the HELPs, you can just pull that off and start asking. But what you do after that is where you need the training. If you're going to refer them to a hospital or a certain type of therapist, that kind of thing, I wouldn't delve into that. But the HELPs questionnaire is very easy to use. Now the BISC, there is a manual associated with it. And what they want is they have a conversation with you about why you're using the tool and in what environment or what context are you going to use the BISC. So there's not necessarily a training, but they definitely want to know why you're using it and who you're using it on. And then they provide suggestions on how you can get what you need. So it's Mount Sinai. I think, I forgot what city. But yeah, you can get it offline. I mean, you can get the information about the BISC. The BISC is not online. You have to get permission to use it.
One of the other questions that we hear a lot is that so much that is publicized about recommendations if someone is diagnosed with traumatic brain injury or post-concussive symptoms, for instance, for athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Hear that they need to rest, that they need to maybe not be in bright lights, to be in darker areas, etc. Do you think of women who may be living in abusive situations, and how realistic is that? Then you think of the realities of shelters and the busy communal living, and just could you comment on that, and what is the best way to support women when so much of what is recommended are things that might be really challenging, if not impossible, for them to practice?
Yeah, I'm sure there are people in the webinar thinking, yeah, good luck with that. It's impossible to provide, to encourage a woman to get rest and not be in such a busy state. But what I would do is, if you're going to schedule an appointment with her to talk about goals related to employment, then you can make an appointment to rest. And you can take, I have seen office spaces. Somebody is suggesting headphones and sunglasses. That's a great idea. So go into the space. So say I'm the social worker and Linda, you're coming to see me. I'm going to have the aromatherapy, the oils going. I'm going to have calm music and I'll have the lights dim. And you and I have a meeting for an hour and we can meditate for 30 minutes. Like you can incorporate, you've got to show them, you've got to incorporate it into their current living experience and not suggest it as something in addition. So teach them to do that. But then also pull in the community. I am sure that there are more women in the shelter who would love to learn how to meditate and provide that, as an opportunity for them. Because, in the shelter, we provide all kind of different activities. And so now, it's really a good thing to be able to provide some healthier options, like meditating, yoga, running, for example, for those who want to do that. You've got to incorporate it into their current space. And when they see the value in it, then they'll take it upon themselves to say, nope, I'm not seeing Linda anymore, but I got to get 30 minutes in of meditating. And so they will, push back on children and partners and say, no, I need 30 minutes. You want me to have 30 minutes because mommy is nicer when I have 30 minutes. So, yeah.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the next question.
Okay.
It comes from a participant who works for child welfare, and she comments that we do a lot of interviewing post-domestic violence, intimate partner violence incidents, interviewing women. And my question is, how is the interview itself impacted by someone with a fresh traumatic brain injury? And also, how do we incorporate traumatic brain injury into advocating for clients?
Mm-hmm. Yay! Whoever asked that question, yay! I'm so proud of you. Okay, so yes, the interviews are a nightmare for women or for anyone, honestly, that experiences a traumatic brain injury. And so you're going to have to carve out some time, if you can, to take breaks. As they're talking with you and you notice that they are, frustrated, touching their head and saying, you're giving me a headache. How long is this going to take? You don't have to have the health question in front of you or the BISC. You can just ask. So you know what? Look, I know this is not a part of the questions that I have right now, but I'm just really curious. I'm really happy that you got out of the abusive relationship. Was there ever a time where your partner, maybe your head was hurt in some sort of fight? Or was it a time where you might have been pushed against the wall or something like that? And then she might ask, particularly if she's a Black woman, she might say, why do you want to know? Then just say, because I'm just really curious, because if you've had a trauma like that, that might be what's giving you the headaches that you're experiencing right now. That might be what's giving you the high level of irritability or aggression that you're experiencing right now. And so if that's the case, I want to take my time, dim the lights, and, and give you some more time to answer those questions. And so now they might be seriously irritated and they might say, you know what, that ain't got nothing to do with you. That's none of your business. I might have had those things, but I just need to get this done so that I can get, X, Y, Z done. And if they do that, then you just say, okay, well, just think about it. So you've got to give them more time in the interview. If you can dim the lights, you can. If you're with child welfare and let's say they're in a shelter, if you can go to the shelter rather than have them come to your office, that might be good too. Just kind of, meeting them where they are.
So Kosua, we have another question, and this one is about somebody's wondering whether if somebody's been abused during childhood, can a TBI happen and then go undetected and then manifest itself as PTSD in adulthood?
Absolutely. There is research out there that has done that level of investigation for folks in military.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they found that what they were finding is that veterans were returning with a certain level of PTSD, but then there were some that were experiencing it, in a much more severe capacity. And they learned that many of them had experienced child abuse before, and where the child abuse happened, and they figure that because the child is now ADHD or can't focus in class or not performing well in school, they think it's solely because of the child abuse, which it could be. I'm not saying that it's not, but it might be an indicator of a TBI as well. And it absolutely, for veterans, they've seen that it manifests into PTSD later. Yep. So I don't know of any research. So I'm not saying that it's not out there, but I don't know of any research on survivors of intimate partner violence, male or female, with that.
What would you suggest is the best way to support a client with severe TBI? And this person that's offering this question says that they have some clients that have been severely abused and they are having great challenges functioning, and they're having a difficult time finding a therapist in the community that's willing to take them on as a client.
So when we talk about a severe level of TBI, I want you to imagine like all the way on the end of the continuum where there is some serious severe impact in functioning. Very often they cannot remember anything. It's like particularly if they're older, people may see it as Alzheimer's. And so trouble concentrating, cannot concentrate, cannot sit in one space for longer than 10 minutes, extremely agitated or angry, very often very combative. So when we think severe, just think about all of the symptoms that we talked about today, and they're like 10 times worse. So when you have someone like that, I honestly would start with talking to a inpatient facility to kind of see if you can get them to a point where, if they're open to taking meds, you can get them to a baseline where they can take some meds to kind of help some of the symptoms so that they now can engage in therapy more effectively. Because they're not, I'm not surprised that they are having a difficult time finding a therapist, because a regular therapist won't take that, because it can be a lot. And so hopefully and if I can ask like a follow-up question, if they're taking meds, that should help level things out for them to be able to find a therapist. But I don't like, that our system sometimes will just give folks meds just so that they can quiet down or not be combative. Like, you've got to ask questions about the TBI. If you know it's a TBI and it's at a severe level, then help the patient, help the survivor understand, taking these meds are going to get you to a point where you can have a productive conversation with the therapist. Because outside of that, it won't happen.
How often do you think bipolar or ADHD is misdiagnosed when really it's a situation of unresolved trauma? And how do you get the medical community to look at this?
I would say that's a good question. So refrain from presenting it as either or. So when you go in and say, this is not PTSD, this is post-concussive symptoms, it might be both. And so, I won't say it that way, but, medical physicians, very often they don't want their decisions challenged. That's a nice way to say that. And so what they want to hear is, your diagnosis of PTSD was on point. The symptoms that she has, is trouble concentrating, problem solving, blah, blah, blah. And then I would give her the same list I would give the other person in the previous question. And then the doctor's going to say, yes, all of those symptoms were there. It's really fascinating that those symptoms are just like post-concussive symptoms. And then they might say, oh, well, it's not that. Really? I trust your judgment, but I had a conversation with her, and she talked about how her partner dragged her by her feet and her head hit 16 concrete steps. I just think it might be something to look into.
Mm-hmm. Is there a lot of research that's been done around what is most helpful for helping to heal a brain after a traumatic brain injury?
Yeah, there is research, and what's fascinating about it is it's counterintuitive to what we think, because with the TBI, you have a cognitive impairment for the most part, but cognitive rehabilitation, it works best. Because what it's doing is helping, there is a regenerative nature to our brains, always tell folks when they have a TBI, and particularly if they are Black women and they believe in a spiritual being, I say, God is good in terms of how he created our brains, because the impact is there, but it doesn't have to stay at that level of impact. Our brains naturally regenerate themselves. We don't do it as often or as much as when we're older. It definitely happens younger. But because we have that tendency to be able to do that, cognitive rehabilitation will help take the brain into a space where it's practicing how to relearn, how to problem solve again, how to concentrate again. And they might not be able to do it to the degree that they were able to do it before the abusive relationship, but they can learn how to do it again. And one of the fascinating things about cognitive rehabilitation is that for any woman, it gives them a sense of accomplishment. You know, here I am with this traumatic brain injury, and I am still now able to retrain myself on how to problem solve. Yeah, I might have to include red and yellow and blue Post-it notes to communicate to me, you know, my short-term memory loss, but at least I'm doing it. That's very different from other forms of treatment related to, and I'm not downplaying those, they are still really good depending on the level of severity. But someone who just focuses on, you know, psychotherapy, or someone who is focused on a task-centered approach, that you were able to get all these things accomplished. But from a cognitive rehabilitation stance, I am able to do that from within and then create my own journey, because I'm learning how, I'm relearning myself. I'm learning how to do this again. So, you know, because it was really fascinating. The woman that I talked about, whose son helped her remember her job interview, and, you know, both of them, their eyes just lit up when they talked about how they arrived at the fact that she could now remember again. Mm. And even though her memory is not good, but the fact that she now has a system where, you know, a red Post-it note means a job interview in the morning, green means something else. So they had created, this was before me, before anyone. Mm-hmm. And they had created this on their own. So just very fascinating for them to see that. Yes, Debbie James, biofeedback therapy does help too.
Dr. McFadgion, we are out of time, and on behalf of our team here, I want to express, and all of our participants, our appreciation, not just for the knowledge you shared in the more formal part of your presentation, but also for your engagement and willingness to interact around questions for these last 20 minutes or so. It was really, really appreciated.
Thank you.
And we will look for additional opportunities to continue to learn from and with you.
Thanks, Linda. I appreciate it so much. It was fun.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, bye. Y'all have a good one.